My name's Steve. I'm the Steve-O in almost every place you can find me. Actually, that's actually a 0, not O. It's a 0, the Steve 0. Long IRC story behind that. Today's talk is going to be using Red Hat's OpenShift platform as a service to develop scalable applications on AWS. That's a mouthful. But what we're actually going to show is how awesome it is to put a platform as a service on top of infrastructure as a service. Okay, that's the main point of today's talk. The mustache is not usually here. It's only here in November. It's a Movember mustache, just so you know, so I'm not really that tough. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I added the cast this year. Last year I just had the mustache. This year I added the cast. Next year I'll bring a machete. Or the pneumatic gun from No Country for Old Men. All right? So the agenda, the big point again is show why both DevOps and developers actually want OpenShift on AWS. Okay? So I'm going to start a demo. Then I'm going to cover some cool architecture. And then, hallelujah, most of this talk, I only have like 10 slides total for the entire talk. So most of this is going to be showing real stuff running up in the cloud in real time. So I get extra points, even from the Russian judges, for attempted difficulty in a public conference with network, okay? So the application, put your mind, we're going to do a little role playing here. We work for a vendor that sells souvenirs, or tchotchkes, if you want to call them that, at national parks in the United States and Canada, right? We're going to make a check-in service to help drive traffic to our stands. Hey, everybody loves social now. We'll do some check-ins. So when they come into the vendor stand, they check in, and they get like a free snow globe, right? So the product manager comes in and says, this is what we're going to be doing. And we're doing a big national promotion, which has the potential, but not at the beginning, we don't know, but has the potential to create a lot of traffic, especially in the summer. And it's due next week. Right? That's usually what, and by the way, we need this next week. So if you're in a traditional IT shop, what would your ops people tell you about that? If this was like, we need to be scaling up to 1,000 by next week, what would they say? They say, no, come back never. Like, that's not happening, right? I can't even order machines that fast. But we're going to talk about why the combination of EC2 with its infrastructure as a service and Red Hat's OpenShift platform as a service makes all this possible. Okay, so let's go look at the application. For those of you who are sitting watching me prepare, you've already seen it. It's here. So that's the URL. All right, I'm going to wait and watch people actually open up their phones and type in that big, long URL. Why did Brenton have to put all those other pieces in it? No, I don't have a QR code. QR code, or what are you, like from 2005? That's so 2005. Yeah, a short URL would have, or a bit.ly URL would have been nice, wouldn't it? I could have... If I was smart, that's what I would have done. But I was thinking about my broken thumb. Are you going to make me cry now? All right. Is everybody bringing it up on our phone? When you do it, you should see something that looks like that. Right? So basically what I did is I went and found an open source licensed data set that shows all the national park lands in the United States and Canada. I put it into an application, and I'm going to talk about the architecture in a minute. And basically what it does is every time you zoom or pan the map, it does a query and finds points within the viewport. Right? And I can actually go out, and it's pretty performant, right? I can go out to the whole United States, which is 504, actually, and Canada, and it'll pull back 547 points. Right? And each one of them has a park name associated with them. The basic building blocks of a social network application. So again, that's the application. And it should work fine on any modern phone browser. Right? The Leaflet, the JavaScript library I'm using, is aware of browsers on the phone. So, oops, sorry. So that's the name, that's the URL one last time for the app. Okay? And it was written with Java EE, because Java is now the new hotness. It was the old busted, but now it's the new hotness again. Right? Everybody who's anybody in social is now running either a Scala or Play or it's straight on the Java, right? So I wrote it with JEE, JEE6, so we're using JBoss EAP. It's got PostgreSQL and PostGIS. So have all of you heard of PostgreSQL? It's like the best database in the entire world. And PostGIS is the spatial blade to go on it. Right? So it does spatial operations. And I'm using Hibernate Spatial on top of that. And then I'm running on OpenShift Enterprise installed onto 2 AWS mediums. Right? So all the infrastructure behind this is just 2 AWS mediums with OpenShift Enterprise. What we did with OpenShift Enterprise is we did some customization to the install. It's a stock install, but then we customized the install a little bit to the use case of our app, which is, I'm not going for efficiency in production. I don't need to pack it as dense as possible. I want my app to be really responsive. So what I did, I played with that a bit, and you'll understand this a bit better as we go through. But what we played with the configuration was scale up faster. Don't wait until you're at peak load before you scale up a new instance. And the other thing we did is we took away some of the CPU throttling on some pieces of it. And I'll explain why we can do that later. And then we're going to load test with BlazeMeter. Right? So BlazeMeter is another Amazon user, and they provide basically JMeter in the cloud. So if you already have your own JMeter scripts, you can run them, but you can also set up really simple tests. I made a scalable app, so we're using HA proxy on OpenShift to do the load balancing. So this is our status page, and we're going to come back to this to show status in a bit. And here's the BlazeMeter test. Right? So basically, it was this simple. All I did, I'll edit it just so that you can see it, what it looks like to set up a test. So I'm going to start it up in EUS East, Virginia, which is also where I'm hosting my OpenShift on EC2 instances, the enterprise instances. And then I just put in a bunch of get URLs. That is the web service behind that map. And I'm going to say, just pull these, right? And then I say I want 1,000 users, and they're making requests those users get to make requests every 4 seconds. Right, so that's a pretty significant load. And what I'm saying, and the reason why I'm doing all this in the beginning is because this is going to be Betty Crocker. Because what you'll see here is I'm doing a stress test, and so I need it to actually ramp up and then get to load so you can watch all the other servers spun up automatically while we're talking. You won't hear my phone buzz. You won't hear Grant's phone buzz. There's no secret magic. The platform will do all of the scaling up behind the scenes for us as BlazeMeter puts the load on it. All right, so that's all. I'm going to just start that test. And what that's now doing is BlazeMeter is now starting up its own instances, and it's going to start hammering those URLs with requests. So we're going to leave that cooking in the oven while we go on to other parts. Any questions? I like questions. So any questions so far? Okay, I have to remind you what's at stake. And no, the good questions are not, can I have two? Right? That does not get you a USB stick. But good questions will get you a USB stick. No questions, because I'm that good at explaining things. That's great. I love it when I'm that clear. Okay. So I'm going to go forward now, I think. Okay. So what is Platform as a Service? How many of you actually really know what Platform as a Service is, rather than think you know? Okay, so not everybody. Good. That's good. I'm glad, Chris, you did raise your hand. So I'm going to talk a little cloud speak here. Infrastructure as a service. Right, we're at an Amazon show. Who is the pioneer in infrastructure as a service? Amazon with EC2, right? You're asking for servers. It's infrastructure. You're asking for raw servers. After you get that server, you have to do a whole bunch of other stuff on top of it, though, right? So it solves the problem of racking and stacking and buying and fixed costs, but there's still a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen to each machine after it's provisioned. Software as a service, that wouldn't have worked in our scenario, right? Because there is no pre-canned app that's this social check-in. Right? We would have to spend months trying to partner with Foursquare, and then they probably wouldn't give us the data, and all sorts of other stuff. What's underneath of that and in between is platform as a service. And so the idea with platform as a service is you spin up the platform as a service, and then developers ask for complete stacks. Right? You can ask for Tomcat with MySQL. You can ask for Node.js with MongoDB. And that whole thing gets spun up with the operating system already installed, with the DNS provided, with everything set to go, and a Git repository, and the developers then just doing Git pushes. Right? And it all comes out of a standard template that's been installed in the platform as a service. Does that make sense to everybody, the distinction between the three? Especially if you didn't know before. If you knew before, then hopefully I didn't confuse you. All right, so that's the distinction. And what OpenShift provides is the platform as a service piece. And so this is the propaganda hat time, but this is also important to understand what we're doing today. So OpenShift Origin, we're Red Hat. So what does that mean OpenShift Origin probably is? What's Red Hat famous for besides, Linux, but what's famous about Linux? It's open source. Sir, you get yourself a USB stick. It doesn't matter. I'll give one for sure for a question. You're never getting one. So OpenShift Origin is our upstream project. It's all in GitHub, openshift.github.io. It's Apache license. There is no contributor license agreement. You can just check it out if you want to. We love pull requests. We hangouts most every Friday. If you go hang out in IRC on OpenShift-dev, almost all the developers are hanging out there. That's our upstream project, and everybody checks into there. And there's a public test server, and everybody's check-ins go into that, right? And we love people participating. Every 3 weeks, we do a push to OpenShift Online, and that's where we, as Red Hat, take the platform as a service and stand it up on Amazon ourselves, right? And then, about every 6 months, we do an OpenShift Enterprise release. And you can think of that like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, right? It's got a longer support cycle. You can get the full suite of professional services to install it, everything, the whole 9 yards that you usually expect from Red Hat. Does everybody understand the differences? So the question you might say is, well, okay, why am I even bother using the EC2 instances with OpenShift Enterprise when Red Hat already has an online service? Did anybody think that question? Okay, 2 USB sticks right there for raising your hand. Nice. Watch your head. Ugh. There, see, I meant actually that for the rebound. Oh. Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. So why would you use OpenShift Enterprise on Amazon Web Services? I think, what? But for your eagerness to try to give a response, I'll give you a USB stick there. I think one of the biggest things here is control, right? We retain control over how the servers are configured. Remember when I said it was a stock install and then we tweaked it? With online, you don't get to do that, right? You get what we give you what you get, and you don't get upset, as my PE teacher liked to say. But with Enterprise, you actually get to go in and say, oh, you know what? I don't want HA proxy, the load balancer, to ever be CPU bound. Take C groups off HA proxy, which is what we did here. Right? I actually want to give this much disk space. We have a gear size here that's a large, which is 2 gigabytes of disk. And this came out, no, 2 gigabytes of RAM, sorry. This recently came out in online, but it wasn't available in online until just this last couple weeks. Nam, when? 2 weeks ago? A week ago? Something like that. One of the last pushes. Monday. Thank you. I was busy getting my talk ready. That's why. And so I could have put those in OpenShift Enterprise. I could have made that a 4 gigabytes of RAM per server, which we call a gear. Right? So we control the service now. We control access to the data. And this is huge for a lot of our customers. Right? Except most of them are actually installing it on their own internal cloud or some VP, if you wanted to use a VPC with Amazon, right? The data is in your purvey. It's not in ours. No one else can see it. We're not buying hardware, though. We still have that benefit, right? So we still get the benefit of infrastructure as a service with a bit more control on top of it. We're not racking and stacking, right? So I spun up Brenton, one of the engineers on our team, spun up 2 EC2 instances, and within a day ran the OO install scripts, had it all set up and running by the next day, the entire infrastructure, right? And that would have been impossible had we had to spin all that stuff up ourselves. And then the other benefit is we get excellent efficiency from our AWS purchase, right? If I buy a medium, and I spin up one, and if I put one JBoss on there, that JBoss now has all the resources on the medium, even if I'm not fully utilizing it. And what you'll see here is when I spin this up later, we're going to be spinning up on those 2 machines about 4 to 5 JBoss instances, a Postgres instance, and an HA proxy instance as well. Right? And then there's another app running in the background that's not going to be taking up any resources. All right. So what does this control actually mean? Right? This is control for both groups, developers and for systems administrators. So what's the good part about developers? Brenton spun all this up in a day, and then I went in and created the app. I didn't have to ask anybody. I self-provisioned. I set up where the code was. I set up the database. No one had to grant me permissions. I didn't have to fill out some long requisition form. And then Brenton knew, though, that my JBoss instance was going to be the instance that he had configured. It was going to be the template that he had asked for. He had control over all the system's resources. Yeah? Yes. Okay, I will repeat the question. Thank you for the reminder. He was saying that his developers, so I'm assuming you're a systems admin or DevOps. You're in infrastructure, right? And so the developers say, you should be using Chef and Puppet. Why aren't you using Chef and Puppet? This is like the Stone Age. Blah, 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 blah. And a year ago, it was, why aren't you using VMware? This can be a replacement for Chef and Puppet, right? Because Chef and Puppet is the script to install a whole bunch of stuff, and then what you still end up happening is installing a bunch of different machines for them. It's a side topic that I would like to talk to you about afterwards, but basically what happens is you have one instance running all of their JBoss servers or their Node servers. You patch that one instance of Node on that machine, and you kick all their apps, and they're all patched. You don't have to go into each individual VM. Dan Jungst, is also, he does a lot of our enterprise stuff, and he's a great person to talk about the systems administration stuff on that as well. But yes, you can use this to not do Chef and Puppet at all, right? What you might still use Chef and Puppet for is putting the machines that host the platform as a service. You might use Chef and Puppet for that, but the developers never have to get involved with Chef and Puppet. Okay, so this one's a kind of a tricky throw because there's a lot of people in front of you. I'm going to go for a high arc. Yeah, nice to lean forward. Good idea. All right. No, they're all the way in the back. They'll get a question. The audio guys will get one at the end. So I think when we do these clear separate... So if you couldn't guess from the mustache, my therapist likes to say, clear boundaries, infinite possibilities. And what that means is when lines are clearly defined between two groups and you know what belongs to whom, within that area you can do anything you want, right? And so I think what OpenShift or a platform as a service internally allows you to do is to set up those clear boundaries where the people who are supposed to do certain things, and they're not doing the things they're not supposed to do. Like developers don't get sudo access. So I think this allows developers and system administrators to kind of really get along, right? Kind of interact in a, oh wait, not that slide. It allows them to actually get along more like that. Yeah, well wait, are you a systems administrator or a developer? Yeah, so the tiger was the sys administrator because they're always beating us down. Oh, I meant the tiger was the developer because they're always sucking resources out of you because the sysadmin was back there. But it's more like this, right, where everybody gets to get along because they're not arguing about the same things. The developers can self-provision, and the systems administrators don't have to have, like they're trying to keep the mail servers running and keep the NAS system up, and they're not getting annoying calls like I need a new VM with all the latest stuff. And you have to spend your time doing that instead. What? Sorry? Yes. Good question. So the question was, can I restrict what developers can provision? Yes. You'll notice in the instance, well, I think I'll show you in a bit, that there's no Mongo available to me on OpenShift Enterprise, right? That cartridge was taken out by Brenton because I didn't need it. So he took that cartridge out of the system, so on Enterprise, I don't get to see it. As a matter of fact, Brenton could have basically said, all you get is JBoss and PostgreSQL. And those would be, and yet he could say, you only get PostgreSQL 9.2. blah, 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 and that's it, right? So, but be careful because then the developer types get really upset with you about how tightly you constrict it. But yes, you can say, look, you guys, we're never doing Ruby. And I would applaud you for that. But we're never doing Ruby, and so you would take the Ruby cartridge out, okay? So I want to go behind the scenes now and show you, take a quick little tour, because I can't show it all in this time. How are we doing on time? I don't have a timer, and I don't, because I'm using my own Mac. Does anybody know what time we're at? How much? 35, so we have about 25 minutes left? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to take you on a quick tour behind the scenes and show you what the DevOps perspective is. Did everybody read the funny, this is not an inspirational one. This is from Despair. I love the Despair ones. They make me laugh all the time. Right? So just to go in there, you know. All right, so let's go behind the scenes. First, I'm going to start. This was new in OpenShift Enterprise coming out in a couple weeks. This is OpenShift Enterprise, and now there is a web console for administering the machine. Right? So remember I said I had 2 Amazon instances running, and there you can see I have 2 nodes. Do you see the nodes on the end? Nodes are actually what hosts the applications. Okay, so those are the servers that apps get provisioned on. And so we have 2 of them in this platform as a service. You can have districts, and districts can be collections of nodes, and they can have different configurations. So let's say you had a production district, and you could have a dev instance, a dev district, and you could have a QE district, and then you could put specific, like you were asking, can you restrict what's in each? You could have, like, in production, all my gears, which are the servers, every gear I spin up has 6 gigs of RAM. But on the dev machines, they get 512, because they're not really doing any scaling. And so those could be different districts with different profiles, right? Here I only have 1 district, and I'm currently running 5 gears. So let's dig in and see. It's spinning. There. I've got 5 active gears. I've got 4 of them running on node 1 and 1 of them running on node 2. Okay, and so then you can look at the load on your different nodes. Yeah, question. Does this auto balance? That is a question I do not know the answer to. So I'm going to ask one of the people who knows more about enterprise. Does it auto? Yes, it does. I take that back. Thank you for allowing me time to think. What it actually does is, as it's spinning up new gears, when it's load balancing an app, it's going to try to spread them across different nodes while they're running. Like when it'll spin them up on different nodes, right? Because what we want to avoid is, oh, something happened to that node, your whole app goes down now. So the next question was, does it move sessions around? HA proxy can be made to be session aware. So it'll keep sessions when it's doing redirecting. Next, hold on. Did I give you one yet? All right, next question right here, and then I'll get you in the back. Yeah, HA, I'll show you as we dig. Yes, I'll give you one now, but you got to wait to see the answer to is it HA proxy is included in there. And it is, but I'll show you later, okay? There was a question in the back, yeah. So a gear is our container, right? How many of you have heard of Docker and containers? Right, so does everybody know, I'm sure you do. Does everybody know that the code base from Docker is getting merged into OpenShift? Right, so we were using a lightweight container technology before. We're going to be moving even more directly into containers with Docker, right? And so that's going to become part of our code base. And no, you cannot share a gear across nodes because that's the container. Right, so the container you have to pick a machine that the container is going to live on. Of a machine, yes. Okay, I warned you sitting all the way back there that I didn't know if my arm, it's coming. Heads up. Oh. It was the aerodynamics of the plastic bag which introduces chaos and, yeah, next question. So, right now, our online service only runs on Amazon. That will be, well, never mind. But in terms of running OpenShift Enterprise, all we care about from an OpenShift perspective is that we have Red Hat Enterprise Linux under us. So you could take any machine, whether it be like an actual physical machine, whether it's a Rackspace machine or Amazon Web Service machine, and like I'm spinning it up on Amazon Web Services, but you don't have to. All we need is RHEL installed, and that actually comes as part of your subscription to OSE. You could, with OpenShift Enterprise, we are completely agnostic. You can run OpenShift Enterprise anywhere you want, in your data center, in some other inferior non-Amazon data center, or in an Amazon data center. In terms of online, we're moving to multi-geographies as well, and that'll allow us to spread things around. Yeah, question? Yes. Hold on. We do, at this point, I don't think do we have AMIs for Origin? No, we don't have AMIs for anything yet, pre-built, right? The question was, do we have AMIs already with the whole OpenShift stuff on top of it? So back to the gentleman's question, we're trying to stay infrastructure agnostic for enterprise. We do understand that some people might like that, but we don't actually need that for online. Online, we're actually using Chef and Puppet behind the scenes to do all of the installation stuff, even on Amazon. Yeah, I'm going to get you in a second, but let me get this one. No, we do not have, OpenShift does not auto-provision nodes, right? We find that, yet, actually you can, that's what I was going to say. In OpenStack, if you choose to run OpenStack underneath, we actually have heat templates for auto-provisioning in OpenStack. And what? And CloudForms, another one of our cloud products, will actually handle all of that auto-provisioning, even in Amazon Web Services as well. What we've found in our online services, we're getting such great efficiencies, we don't have any auto-provisioning in online. In online, we just have a couple sysadmins just watching load, and they're like, oh, load's getting kind of high, let's actually spin some more up. It's never like, holy cow, we're swamped, right? So, hold questions. I want to make sure I get through a bunch of this stuff, and there'll be a bunch of us staying around afterwards to ask questions as well. And I'll try to leave time at the end. Okay, so the other thing is, remember my app was called Parks. So I can actually, if I know a specific, he didn't get a key? You know why? Because the sins of the friend flow down. My app was called Parks. So with this console, I can drill down into specific applications, right? So if one of your users calls up and says, hey, something funky is did it search yet? No. If something funky is going on with my app, can you check out what's going on? Or which nodes is my app running on? I've scaled up, right? I've actually got now 4, 5 JBoss instances running and a Postgres instance running in my app, right? And so you can see all the different nodes, and you can see it's done some balancing around. This one, this one, this one, and this one are all running on node 1. This one's running on node 2. Right? So I'm now, and this is back to that efficiency part before, I'm now running 4 JBoss instances and a Postgres instance all on node 1 right now. Yeah, question? So the question I think was, can you do a more complicated network than something inside of Amazon, right? As long as the machines can see each other, we have the ability for brokers, which is the ones that shift off the jobs, to see multiple nodes and to shift jobs between multiple nodes. On the near roadmap is to actually have apps span data centers. It's not in the product yet for enterprise, but it's coming it should be coming in the next cycle. Right. The IPs don't matter as long as the machines can see each other. As long as the machines can see each other. All right. Good. You've got a wall behind you, so I can overshoot. Oh, I was using the rebound there. Did you see the backboard? And I almost took out the projector. I bet that would have been like half a year's salary for me. All right. So you can, and I can also look at myself, right? So I can go by user. The user calls up and says, hey, what's going on with what do I have provisioned? And this, as the systems administrator, you can go and dig in and look, right? So I've got 4 different apps running, right? Test Eclipse, Monitor, Test Python, Parks, right? Yeah. Yeah, with the user profile, you can say they get 10 gears, right? And so on dev, you may say they only get 10 gears, and then you may, on the production instance of OpenShift, you say there's only 3 users total, and they can deploy as many as they want because they're the actual systems administrators that are taking the Git repo and moving it over, right? Or they're the developer, they're like 3 approved developers. Yeah, I'm going to ask the guy behind you because you're a troublemaker. Yeah, okay, guy in the green shirt. Node.js. Node.js already comes, but let's say you were, for some strange reason, you like the kind of pain that comes with WebSphere, right? And so the question was, how hard is it to customize stuff? We have customers who said, we were not using JBoss, we were using WebSphere. And so what they're doing is they're actually making their own cartridge, which is the plugin functionality, to do that. Perforce is a bit more of a complicated issue because we actually have Git hooks in the development process that allow us to pick up when a commit has been done and deploy it. We have people asking for Subversion and Perforce and TeamCity, but I don't know this. I don't know. Dan might know some use cases or something, but we're going to wait until after because I think I'm starting to run out of time, and I haven't even shown the developer experience. Okay. I still have a half hour? Okay. Now, let me just keep going, and then we'll try to get questions at the end. So let's try to save some because I want to try to get through everything. Okay. The other thing, though, is, because there is a lot to cover, I'm actually now going to, as the systems administrator, SSH into the, I want to actually SSH into a node. We're going to SSH into node 1. Right? So as the systems administrator, I can do this. Understand, there is a very clear separation between what developers can do and what systems administrators can do. Developers can never do this unless you somehow give them the permission to SSH into the machine, and then I don't know why you got a platform as a service in the first place. Because this is what you're supposed, developers, the key to this is developers are to be able to do the things they need to do that they usually bug you to do, like, oh, can you give me permissions to see my log files? Oh, can I change my PostgreSQL conf just a little bit? Those kinds of things they should be able to self-do without having to bug you, and then you're happy because you've already set things up. So I'm into that node right now. You can run things like top, right? And you can see that Java's actually using quite a bit of resources right now, right? We can go to /var/log. Oops. Yeah, you're right, I do. Thank you for pair programming. And then we can go into OpenShift. And then we go into, we're a node, so it's going to be in the node one. Because you can have a node and a broker on this. What am I doing there? You guys should have stopped me. Oh, you guys should have stopped me on that one. You can have a node and a broker. The broker is kind of the orchestrator, and the nodes are the actual hosters. You can have them on the same machine. Like the origin, the OpenShift origin, the open source part, there's actually a Puppet script to install, a Puppet and Vagrant script to install it all on one machine. Here, so you can start looking at the platform log, right? So you can look inside of that. That'll give you some idea about what's happening in your machine. Right? So there's all the stuff. We've done a whole bunch of we've done a whole bunch of stuff to actually give you, as a systems administrator, views into what's happening in your system. Right? So there's the whole logging part. All of the users space is in, let's see if I can remember, cd, is it var? Yeah, var lib, OpenShift. Right, and so do you see all of these UUIDs? Each one of these is a different application or a different gear group, right? So basically these are auto-spun up by the platform. No more do you as a systems administrator, and no more do you as a developer have to wait for a systems administrator to create an account. The platform creates a unique account and then does all the permissioning that's needed for that user. And so if you go in there, I'll show you the developer experience coming in the other way, right? And there's all sorts of pluggable ways to do authentication, right? By default, we do HTTPD authentication, which I'm assuming actually nobody here is using. But we can plug into LDAP and a whole bunch. It's a pluggable interface, and you can plug in other authentication mechanisms. Okay? Any questions? Okay. So that's kind of the tour of what the DevOps person gets to see, right? So they have full control over the machine. They can change configurations around where they want to. There's a nice, but they also have the nice web interface to get a quick overview of the system, and that product, the web interface, is going through rapid development. So there'll be a lot of improvements coming to that over time. The next slide is we're going to take a tour from the developer's perspective. Right? So I know there's at least one developer in the room. How many other developers are there in the room? Great. Okay, so you should also look at OpenShift Online, because what actually, the flow, let me just go back a couple slides to here. When Brent and I were doing this together, he was the administrator, and so I was waiting for him to spin stuff up. I don't have a laser pointer. I don't think it works. So while I was waiting for Brenton to spin everything up, I was actually working on OpenShift Online, right? Doing all my work with JBoss. It was only a 512 megabyte instance, but I still had PostgreSQL. I still had PostGIS. I was doing all my development work. Brenton brought everything up. I took my Git repo, pushed it up to the OpenShift Enterprise instance he had made, and I was good to go. Right? There was I didn't have to change, absolutely nothing actually changed in my entire code. Right? Because they're that compatible across it. So the good part for you developers is, even if the people in systems administration are somehow slow in getting you machines, not that that would ever really happen in real life, you can actually start on online for deving and prototyping, and then it's usually a much easier discussion to say, look what I built. Give me a machine for this really cool thing. Don't you want it? Right? So that's the relationship between the two. All right, let's go back to where we were. Yes. Okay, so I'm just going to show the developers, and also, oops. I'm going to show the developers in the room. Okay. How easy it is to create an application. So, all right, we had a bunch of hands go up. How many of you are Java developers that were developers? A lot. How many of you are PHP developers? Are you ashamed of it? What is it with this hand going like this? All right, how many of you are, the only other one I'm going to say is Python. How many of you are Python developers? It's kind of a tie between Python and Java. So therefore, I'll go with PHP. All right, so this is what it takes to create an application. And this one's going to be, I'm going to spin up an application actually against my own instance that was running there. Remember, like, this is my private instance. RHC app create PHP. Oh, no, I need to name the app. What should we name it? What? Foobar. Who said that? Okay, I'll give you a stick for that, but there's no way I'm naming that. That's like so cliche. We're going to name it Zebra. Because it's an underappreciated animal. Actually, I'm going to tell a joke. Because we're going to name it Giraffe. Okay, and the reason why is, here's the joke. Ready? A man and a giraffe walk into a bar. Have you guys heard this one? Okay, good. A man and a giraffe walk into a bar. The giraffe falls down and lays down and falls asleep there in the bar. The bartender comes over and says, "Hey, what's that lion there?" And he goes, "That's not a lion, it's a giraffe." Yeah, okay. I think I owe everybody in the audience a USB stick for that. Okay, so we're going to make it PHP-5.3 and MySQL-5. And that's it. Right? That will spin up an application. That's the only command I need to execute. If I wanted to put MySQL on a different gear and PHP on another gear, and I wanted PHP to be able to scale up to more instances, kind of like what's happening here, to make it a scalable app, all I have to do is do -s. Right? And that says MySQL on its own gear, its own resources, it gets its own CPU, it gets its own RAM, its own disk, and PHP's on its own, and they can scale independently. If I actually had a Git repo that I knew would work in OpenShift, I could say -- from code, HTTP, point it to the Git repo, and it'll actually do the Git clone when it's creating the application and move the code in and spin it up. Right? So, but I'm not going to do any of that now. I'm just going to spin these two up. And so now what's happening behind the scenes? Actually, let's see. What's happening behind the scenes? Oops. What's happening behind the scenes is the brokers are going to go out and say, okay, I need to find a node to host this app. And then it's going to spin up, it's going to make the container, which does all the SE Linux permissions, all the C grouping, all the fun Linux stuff. Then it's actually going to spin up an Apache with mod PHP instance that belongs to the user that you'll see created at the end of this. And then it's going to also spin up in that same container MySQL that's also attached to that user. Then it's going to make a Git repo and then clone that Git repo down to my machine. Any questions? Yeah. Right now, all we have is PHP-5.3. 5.4 is coming soon. It's done. We've spun that all up. Right? It's basically finished. And we only have MySQL 5.1. In the near future, we'll have PHP. Is it 5.4 or 5? Did we decide to go to 5.5? We'll have 5.4. On online, we have Zen Server. So there's a Zen. Boaz is from the Zen team. On online, we have Zen Server, and that has PHP 5.4 in it. And you can specify which version you want to use there. Again, with enterprise, then it becomes up to your systems administrator. Your systems administrator could say, you guys are all running 5, or whatever, for whatever reason they want to. Or you could say, look, system administrator, we need to have 5.5 because that's the best and the latest. And then they could put it in there, and then everybody gets the benefit of having it every time they spin it up. Okay? Let me just finish with this. I'm going to throw you a key in a second. Let me just finish there. So I needed to acknowledge that host because it needed to do the Git clone, and it needed SSH for it. So see, here's the user it created, right? That's that user. Remember when I went into varlib OpenShift, and then I showed all those users in there? That's a new user. And if I go now back to my web interface, and I look for the application called Giraffe, not a lion, there it is. So but from a developer's perspective, I dare you to find the phone number and get off the phone with a systems administrator in the time it took to spin up PHP and MySQL and have it all running. That's a live URL now. Right? If I go back to this and it says, here's your URL, it's not much of an app because it's just our normal template app. But if I go here and I open up a new tab, oops. There's your app. It's up and running, live to the world. Right? So no one had to talk to the networking guys. Right? There was no DNS registration anybody had to do. The platform takes care of all of that. So again, what I'm hoping you're seeing also is how this makes life easier both for the systems administrators and the developers and getting the stuff that they want to get done in a quick fashion, even when you're running on your own private instances, not even in our online one. Yeah? We use bind by default. You could use whatever DNS you want to use. Yeah? You cannot change that. That's a decision you have to make at the beginning. But the thing is, let's say that was the dev instance. When the production instance was spun up, they would spin up that exact same infrastructure with a -s. And then as long as they're using the environment variables rather than hard coding IPs, then you can just take that same Git repo, move it over, and it'll just work. Okay? Yeah. Easy. No, it depends on what the cartridge needs to do. The question was, how hard is it to create a cartridge? If you need to do something that, like, one of the harder cartridges that we're having the community work on right now is Cassandra. Right? Cassandra is kind of a harder cartridge because it does all this auto-discovery and talks over a lot of network ports and tries to do a lot of auto-scaling. But we've also had people make like a play cartridge, and that's really easy. I didn't make a cartridge. I did a quick start for Minecraft to run on an OpenShift, right? So that's really actually very easy to make. It just depends on how much your application is trying to do. Yeah, actually one of the things I didn't show is if you put that cartridge into GitHub, back here where I did this, and I said PHP 5.3, or you said MySQL 5, whatever, 5.5, which is probably the latest, I think. You could actually put in the URL to the manifest, and OpenShift will go grab it and download all the binaries and install the cartridge, and then spin up your app with that cartridge, if it's in a publicly accessible URL. But I want to move on. I know you've got more questions about it, but I really want to move on because I want to get through everything. A Bitnami stack? No. Sorry. If I understand Bitnami right. Bitnami is kind of like where they put together a whole stack, right? And then we don't have a translator from Bitnami to OpenShift cartridge. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to look over to this side of the room. Any questions over here, you guys? Call out if you have one. All right? All right. So that's all. Now I'm going to show you what it takes to do a code change. Right? So I've showed you the page. We now cd into Giraffe. Right? And actually, if I do this, you can see it's a Git repository. We did a Git clone at the end. I can now go into PHP. That page that we were just looking at was this one, index.php. Right? So now I'm going to, because I'm hardcore, and like either VI and Emacs is like too heavyweight for me, it like drags me down. I'm just straight nano. All right. Let's just cut all of this out. Goodbye. I totally could have. This page is, you know what? Never mind. I'm going to actually go into health check. So I'll show you what health check actually does. It should just return 1. Am I spelling it right? Health underscore check dot PHP. There, see, it just returned a 1. Because the code for that is that. Right? So it's basically just saying, is the app responding? We're going to change this instead to, do I have to say, Grant, do I have to say echo PHP info, or do I just say PHP underscore info? PHP info? Right? Okay. There is my extremely awesome code change. right? So now I'm done. Git commit with only 2 M's. Right, so I'm going to commit it to my local repository, and then I do a git push. So this is just pushing it back up to that gear, that server that we created. We have there, the push is now done. You'll see now what you're seeing is our platform picking up that a git push was done. There's a hook there. It picks it up. By default, we start and stop the servers. I can actually put a flag in the Git repo that says don't stop the server. Like with PHP, I almost never need to stop the server. But by default, we do. There, it's done. My code change is done, and if I go back to health check, there's the page, right? So that becomes the flow for developers from then on. So here, so sysadmins, when you say, hey, you know, I'm going to bring in OpenShift, and they say, oh, that's going to require a whole bunch of proprietary tools and blah, 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 and I don't want to do. No. All it requires is that their development flow understands Git and SSH. Right? Those are the only 2 tools we use. So if your IDE understands Git, you can just drop the Git URL that we got from before. Right? If I scroll back up, and this is actually how I worked on my app a lot, because I like to use IDEA for my Java development. So I just took this Git URL, dropped it into IDEA, did a Git clone. It's all in Java, we do Maven. IDEA saw that it was a Maven repository, loaded up the whole project, and then every time I wanted to push to the server, I just did a git commit, git push in IDEA, and it all worked. Right? So as long as whatever tooling you use understands Git and SSH, there's no other tooling that they need. It doesn't have to interrupt their flow at all. Okay? Let's see, how are we doing on time now? Time check. 11 minutes, 10 minutes? Okay, let me see what I wanted to do. How many of you are Eclipse users? Okay, there's enough of you that I'll show you how it works. There's our JBoss team has written an awesome plugin for Eclipse. I'm trying to bring, oh, I went too far. Whoa, it's mirroring now. All right, never mind. Maybe when I did the talk, it switched to mirroring. Okay, so it's JBoss Developer Tools. Basically, you install that. You click on New OpenShift Application. By the way, you should be using Kepler, not Juno. Okay, use Kepler. Are all of you using Kepler who are the Eclipse users? Yeah? Okay. So it can see, I can ask it, okay, I want to use one of my existing applications. It sees all the applications I created, and it'll do a git clone and bring it down. Right? But I don't want to, because I like fresh and new. And this time, I'm going to name it Lion. And this time, I'm going to make it into a Python app. No, I'm going to make it into a Java one. Let's do Java. I am treating you just like my kids. All right, we'll do Tomcat 7. Right? And I'm not going to add any database to start with. Right? Here you can say if you had that Git repo again, you could put it in there. Next, create a new project, set it up for easy publishing, so it'll actually add this project to the easy publishing in Eclipse. Next, put it in the default location. No, because I don't want to pollute my default location with demos. There, oops, I say check it out to git_demo. Finish. That's it. Right? So I never left Eclipse to do any of my OpenShift work. And that's how easy it is to spin, and it'll check out the code, it'll see the Maven repository in there, it'll download all the Maven dependencies, and we're done. So and then you can do all sorts of things like publish right from there. You can actually SSH it into your gear right from the Eclipse. You can set up that port forwarding that I was doing. We support port forwarding, so you can set it all up through Eclipse. Last thing I'm going to show you as a developer, and this would actually also make sysadmins happy too. How many of you have people internal to your organization who ask for WordPress sites to be spun up for them? Right? And it's pretty often, right? They're like, oh, I need a new site for this marketing campaign, or a Drupal site. Right? With OpenShift, we can do that, and they can do that themselves in one click. Right? So I'm going to add an application. This is on OpenShift Online. We don't have any of the quick starts integrated into Enterprise. We let our customers put that in if they want. So I have to demonstrate this here. But I'm going to do, where is WordPress? PHP, where? Instant Apps, WordPress. So that's it. I'm going to call it, no, I'm not going to call it PHP. I'm going to call it Bad Jokes, where I'm going to collect all my bad jokes. Right? It tells you the Git repo it's going to use. Remember when I gave that flag where I said from code? This is actually doing that same thing behind the hood. And then the cartridges is using PHP 5.3 and MySQL, and I'm saying it's not scaling. That's it. Done. That's all it takes to spin up a full WordPress site. Right? So you basically, for those people who say, oh, spin me up a new WordPress, spin me up a new WordPress, give them an account on OpenShift, either internal or tell them to go online, and then they can spin up their own sites to their heart's content. And it's a full version. It's not like WordPress.com where you can just change the templates. It's the whole thing. Okay? So that's the instant applications. All right. So let's go back. Oops. Eclipse is now waiting for this. I'll just say yes, so I can do the git clone. I did all that, right? You can actually SSH in. I'm not going to show SSHing in because I see people starting to get overwhelmed. So I'm going to go, I think it's time to go check our cake in the oven. We're going to look at that site that we had spun up early on and see how much load is generated. So I hope I didn't exceed the timeout. Here we're going to reload the HA proxy page. There. So remember, there was only one gear when we started. And while I was talking, here's what's happening in BlazeMeter. BlazeMeter has this really nice reports interface. Right? Here's the load results. So there's 1,000 users, right? And this is the response time. So something just happened to the response time. I don't know what. But here's all the response time. It's staying nice and fast, right? I can actually look at how many hits per second. So I'm basically generating 120 hits per second on that site, which to me is like a very successful site. I don't know about most of you, but that in general is a very successful site. What? Better than... Yes. They should have been running the whole thing on OpenShift. And so you can also look at how much KB we're piping down a second, right? We're basically putting down that 1.5, right? So that's 1.5 megs a second is getting pushed over the pipe with those instances. Right? You can see all of that, and then you can go back and look at the HA proxy page and see that that's being served up by all these gears. Right? We actually have spun up 4 JBoss gears, and the reason there's that brown one which says down is that once we spin past 2 gears, we take HA proxy off and put it on its own gear. When we originally spin it up, we put HA proxy and JBoss on the same gear in the same container. But once HA proxy is managing more than 2 different containers, we say, okay, you know what? You're going to actually need enough CPU potential that we're going to put you on your own container. So HA proxy is that brown one on the bottom, and you can see that we've served up over 2 gigs worth of data, about 2.5 gigs worth of data since we started talking here. And if I go back to my app, it's still incredibly responsive. Right? So there's still 1,000 people hitting that app, and when I'm scrolling around or when you scroll around on your phone, it's still incredibly responsive. Right? So that, to me, as a developer, the fact that I could just execute one command and get an app that could do this, for all the developers in the crowd, like every time you have to do Linux system administration, how do you feel? You feel crappy. Right? You're like, oh yeah, I got it running, but I'm sure I left like 5 different security holes in it, and I don't know what's going to happen under load. And here I didn't have to do any of that. I just spun it up. And then all the sysadmins in the crowd are excited because I spun all that up, and I never had to call them. Right? There was no beepers going off. Nobody's beeper went off to get to this. Right? Nobody's beeper went off to get to the auto-scaling. Nobody's beeper went off to say there was more load on the servers. Nobody had to create an account for me. Nobody had to install any special software for me. No one had to make a DNS entry. So even if you're going to use an infrastructure as a service, there are definite advantages to putting a platform as a service on top of it. For everybody. Right? So you had a question. Then you would have Zabbix or something, or Big Brother. That's when you as the system administrator would have something watching the nodes and looking at, like that's what our online, what they would do is they would just add, like we would say, okay, we're obviously getting a lot of load. I'm going to add 3 more nodes into the cluster, and then it would start spinning up new JBoss instances on. What would happen is the app would die, right? It wouldn't tell the app. It's the same thing as if you spun up 2 Amazon instances, and then they ran out of resources on their own, your app just starts slowing down and dying. Right, okay. So Grant wants me to point out to you, because I obviously did not do a good enough job explaining it, that as the administrator, you could have said that app only gets 10 gears or 5 gears. Like the administrator could have said, this user, me, maximum they get is 15 gears, right? And so, sorry? Then what it'll do is, to you as the developer, it looks like your app is slowing down again, right? Because you're going to start getting you've exhausted all the resources that have been given to you, right? And then what happens is, once this load goes away, these will automatically spin down by themselves, and it'll go back to 1 gear. And then, if nobody hits this in, I think Brenton set it up for a 2-day auto idle. If nobody hits this app for 2 days, it serializes the entire app to disk, right? It doesn't get rid of it. It just serializes it to disk. And the next request that comes in has to wait for it to spin back up. But after that, and then 1 gear is up all the time. So how many of you work in the United States? Right? And what season is it that we all love so much when we interact with HR? Open enrollment, right? So my favorite example is the open enrollment app. Enterprise, you could have enterprise instance inside with an open enrollment app on it. And you would never have to pre-allocate servers like when open enrollment was coming. You just leave it running all year long. So during most of the year, for the other 11 months or 11 and a half months when open enrollment is closed, it's basically serialized to disk. Then someone hits it, it spins up the app. And then there's like 2 people who are good in the entire company, and they kind of check early on, and they do their open enrollment. So it keeps going along for one server. But then it's the night before, or the day before, and everybody starts doing, oh my gosh, I got to get my health insurance in. And so what can happen is, it'll auto-scale up the other instances of that, and it's probably not even talking to a database in OpenShift. It's probably talking to Oracle on the back end, right? Most people's HR systems are either with Oracle or SAP or something else, but your front end can be in OpenShift, and that's scaling up and taking all the load, and then you just leave it alone, and then after open enrollment's done, it'll start scaling it all back down and then shut it down. And you didn't have to touch anything. Yeah? Okay, ready? Here it comes. Watch behind you. So the question was, how does Red Hat charge for the JBoss instances if you're not running, like it's not running any cores in the beginning, and then for 11 months, and then it's not running any different cores, you're just spinning up a different number of gears, right? And so what happens is you get a subscription for OpenShift, and then you get, it is the OpenShift subscription, and you guys correct me if I get this wrong, because I'm mostly an online guy. But you get a subscription to OpenShift, you get it per number of cores on the machine it's put on. Cores or socket pairs, depending on what you want to do. And however many apps you run within those cores or socket pairs, you have to pay extra to get JBoss as part of that. Right? So you can get OpenShift, then there's another SKU to get JBoss, but then once you've paid for those SKUs and you have that instance running, you could have 1,000 apps installed, almost all of them idled, and it's no change in price. You don't pay us anything else. Right? It's based on how much resources you're actually consuming on the box. So if what happens is you hit this huge number, then it's all running, not idled anymore, and you need to add new nodes, then you'll pay when you add new nodes. But once a node is up and running and you've paid for that node, you don't pay any extra fee for OpenShift Enterprise. Does that make sense? You pay for, yes, because you're, so that, okay. Okay, who's talking here? Okay, wait, I want to answer, but this is specific also to something about we've talked about here, right? What I did here was I stood up OpenShift Enterprise for production. If you were spinning it up for development, you might take 4 or 5 machines and say, this is my development cluster, and developers, you only get 1 gig of RAM, and you only get 10 gigs of disk space. And then and mine auto scales, I set my auto scaling to like, if you start to get really any amount of load, scale up a new one. You could say to them, don't auto scale a lot, and then you let all your developers just self-provision all their development apps on those machines, right? And so instead of giving each one of them their own server or their own virtual machine or whatever, you're provisioning on here. And what do developers love to do? Oh, I've got this great new idea for an app. You got to give me a VM. And then you give them a VM, and then how often do they give it back to you? Never, right? They're like, ooh, I got a VM. And as long as that VM is up, it takes those 2 gigs of RAM or 4 gigs of RAM, and those are gone from the machine. With here, once my app spins down to disk, all those resources are then available to the other developers on that machine. So you can get incredibly high density. This is why companies like Accenture and other companies, and eBay, and who's the film company? DreamWorks, right? They're moving their developers onto OpenShift internally. They're standing up OpenShift Enterprise for their developers so they can specifically avoid these problems of, can you make me a new VM? I need a VM with Node.js. I need a Node VM. And guys, go self-provision. I want you to use those and get incredible high density on those machines. I've already bought the machine, so I just want to make that run as white hot as possible. And you can get that with this as opposed to a VM solution, where each VM just takes resources and it's gone, whether it's being used or not. Yeah? A chargeback kind of system? Yeah, so the question was, is there a way to set you get a maximum number of gear hours per month? That's not built into our solution currently, but we also, all this stuff is being kept in Mongo logs, and there's MongoDB, and there's ways to pull those stats out. You could write, there's nothing built into the system, but all the pieces are there for you to write stuff that would allow that to happen, especially for chargeback. Like you ran this many gear hours over the month. Pay me. Yeah? Only what the machine will support. Oh, sorry, Grant needed to chime in with facts, like those matter. It's limited to 6,000 gears per application or per node? Per district. So 6,000, you can only have, right, and an app can't span a district. Right, so the most you can get per app is 6,000 gears. And if you run that app, you are going to be one of our lighthouse customers. I want to have you come talk to us and tell us what you're doing that's using that much resources. Yeah? Oh, nice. So the question was, how do we compare to Beanstalk or other solutions? Of course, Beanstalk is a very nice and wonderful PaaS. We think they've done a great job innovating in this space, but we're better. We're totally better. We're like, well, okay, so on a real, what? They're more modest? I'm more modest. Yeah, why, did you go to one of their talks? Were they really not modest at all? I don't know. Really, honestly, so here's one of the, are you asking really what's one of the key differentiators? Is that what you're trying to get? Okay. So one of the key differentiators is, one, it's open source, right? So if you don't like us and you don't like what we're putting together, fork the code base and go build your own, right? It's not like we're ever going to be, please don't, we love pull requests, but you're more than welcome to. On a personal level, I would not like you to do that, but like we have providers, GetUp Cloud is in Brazil. We don't have a data center in Brazil right now. So they saw a market opportunity. They take OpenShift Origin, and they've standing up GetUp Cloud, which is OpenShift Origin, and they're reselling that service to the Brazilian market. They took all the documentation, made it Portuguese, and they're standing up on a Brazilian data center, right? So there's one, so it's open source. Two, there is no on-premise installation for Beanstalk. Right? You can't ever take that. You can, yes? Okay, so he asked, what about Cloud Foundry? Yeah. So the problem, there's certain people on that team that really rub me the wrong way, so I really want to dig in and like say how bad that platform is, but I won't. I think some of the key differentiators between us and Cloud Foundry is, one, if you trust Ubuntu for your server machines, then that might be something viable that you could look at. If on server machines that are in production, you generally want to run Red Hat Enterprise Linux with everything that comes from it, like the ability to get support, the ability to get things in the kernel, the ability to have 10 years of support or 3 years of support, then Cloud Foundry doesn't run on that. Two, Cloud Foundry doesn't do this. Cloud Foundry does not auto-scale at the application level. Three, the Cloud Foundry, what we call cartridges, I don't know what they call theirs, but whatever they do for putting new functionality in, right now they're basically on the same thing as build packs, which is from Heroku. Our cartridge model is much more sophisticated than build packs. So with a build pack, you can say, I want to install these sets of binaries. With our cartridge model now, you can say, I want to install this, and it depends on this, and it depends on this, and I want you to publish these environment variables and I want you to subscribe to these environment variables if they're already there, you can orchestrate the entire application as a cartridge, right? And it could require MySQL, Lucene, a whole bunch of stuff, and it just goes through and installs all of that as part of the cartridge system. The other reason, part of why do you want me to keep going? Yeah, that's what I was just going to get to. The other reason is they're not using the full capabilities of the Linux kernel, right? So basically, Ubuntu made the decision to strip out a bunch of the SE Linux stuff, and what we do with ours is we're full on using SE Linux. We like to say we're SE Linux without any of the administration hassle, right? Because everybody who runs Linux on their own machines? Yeah? And what's one of the first things you do to SE Linux when you install it? Off, deny, go away. Terrible for the desktop in general, unless you have someone else to install it for you. But on a server, I love the idea of SE Linux, and I especially love the idea that Dan Walsh, one of the people who put Linux in the kernel, writes our SE Linux policies, right? And so what that means is someone could get root on the app. Like if there's a root exploit through JBoss, they can get to root, but that root user is still running in the context of the application, that long UUID, so they can't actually do sudo su, because that's been denied based on the SE Linux, right? And with C groups, like we're taking advantage of things deep in the kernel, and we have committers working towards integrating more of that stuff in. Like that's why the Docker guys were so excited to work with us, because now what's happening is their great container model, we basically have taken their great stuff that they're doing with containers, taking them and using the white hot heat of open source and bringing in Dan Walsh and all the other people who do all these low-level kernel things, and they're working together. So like the Docker guys will be like, well, how would I do this? And Dan will say, well, you do this. And now it's part of their containers. So I think that's another key differentiator. I'm trying to think of what else. They're still in beta. You can't actually buy Cloud Foundry. So it's been beta after beta after beta after beta after beta. Actually, this is the 1-year anniversary of OpenShift Enterprise, and we've had 3 releases, production releases in that time for OpenShift Enterprise, and OpenShift Online has been in beta for 2 years, but then we actually released the product. So if you want to buy something with the ability to get support, that's another big differentiator. Plus, we're nicer. All right. And more modest. OpenShift now with more modest. Okay, any other questions? Because I think I'm out of time. Is that right? Oh, okay. The note is, Dan says, is this from you? You want to announce it? Dan, come on, this is your chance. And it matches well if you have a yellow and black cast. Let's just wrap up. OpenShift helps ops and devs just get along, right? Through a standard interface. It's that clear separation of concerns. And that interface provides developer agility. Right, here comes the marketing speak. So what developer agility in this case means is a developer gets to spin stuff up whenever they want to, and they don't have to get system administrators in the way. Operational standardization. Say that 10 times fast, and I got a USB stick for you. Meaning, basically, I can define a template, and everybody's spinning up JBoss the same way. Everybody's spinning up Mongo the same way. Everybody's starting from the same Git repository. Efficiency in IT, and I already talked about that. And with the efficiency comes responsive apps that auto-scale, demonstrated, and cost effectiveness. So I think I'm supposed to show you this slide. Right? Please give us your feedback on this presentation. That's my talk number. If you want to give feedback. Can you do that in the app or something like that? I don't know. Okay. Do it in the app now. No, just kidding. All done. Thanks, guys.